how life begins for humans, but you might be surprised to learn how a Jurassic carnivore...
Been a while since I've made a rant video, but we're gonna go ahead and bring it back. We're gonna go ahead and talk about a completely forgotten tower in this game that I'm pretty sure all of you guys are already scratching your heads about if it wasn't for the thumbnail, and that is the Gladiator. So, first off is, what the hell am I gonna ramble about this time? So, one of the things that I have just seen for so long is the fact that no one even uses the Gladiator anymore. The last time I've used him was, well, this footage that I actually seen, but before this, it was probably longer than I don't know, I would say like more than 7 months or something like that. This guy is quite forgettable, quite honestly, and one of the biggest reasons, I guess, or one of the main points, is the fact that he is just completely outmatched from all of the other 3 melee troops, even from the Warden, okay? So, back in the days, I believe everyone was doing that whole which one is better of the melee towers, the Warden or the Gladiator, since they were both very cheap to place down, did pretty good damage, and were generally very good starting troops, but they did have their differences. For an example, Warden really just was really good at just dealing heavy amount of damage, however, for one enemy at a time. But the Gladiator, on the hand, he basically specialized on dealing very little-ish damage, I would say, compared to the Warden, however, to multiple enemies at the same time. But the Gladiator is much cheaper, so this was the whole like conflict of people being like, which one is better, Gladiator or Warden? But ever since the whole like Brawler update, and also the more buffs to the Warden and all of the other melee troops, this guy has kind of been just left in the dust. And when I mean this guy, I'm talking about the Gladiator. And I decided to check out the many like buffs or changes to his stats, and it turns out the only or the very last time the Gladiator was actually changed was back in the 5th of August 2023. This is basically the very last time the Gladiator was actually changed for stats reasons. Now, he was changed all the other times, like for an example, to give him more skins, but also to make some bug fixes. But aside from that, this was the very last time he was even touched. And I still think, and I do believe, that the Gladiator should get buffed again. Let's go over the good old-fashioned points on why this guy is just dead in the water in the meta. First things first is, well, quite honestly, not everyone is gonna have this guy, so that's a pretty obvious one. Even though he was obtainable, I believe last year or something like that, I don't even remember, but he was obtainable for a little bit of time, but then eventually was just taken off the store. However, one of the other reasons why the Gladiator is just dead in the water is mainly because of his stats. Let's just go ahead and rip the band-aid off. Comparing him to, for an example, the Warden, his competitor, is really just a huge stretch nowadays, because the Warden is a lot more competent compared to the Gladiator. Sure, the Gladiator is able to hit more enemies and is able to have way cheaper upgrades, but still, the Warden is actually better for both damage-wise and, well, just, I mean, being able to stun enemies every single 3 hits is still a great. While the Gladiator is just him slashing, dealing very low damage, and the more you upgrade him, obviously the more damage he does, but it still doesn't really actually help, especially during the mid-game when there are a bunch of troops that are now having a ton and ton of HP, that where the Gladiator just fades into irrelevancy. Like, the fact that no one is using a tower that is relatively supposed to be a, you know, pretty okay to a pretty good one is kind of sad. The third point is just the fact of how useful this guy is in games. So really, we're just gonna have to go ahead and splash some cold water on you guys and just say that really this guy is only useful for like wave 1 all the way until, I would say, wave 15, and then he's just completely useless at that point, because his weapons do barely any damage, and most of the time, if you even have the Gladiator in your loadout, you're most likely not going to spam him all over the map just to be able to get any uses out of him. You're probably going to spam him in a few areas, but if you have a bunch of other troops that you want to use, like for an example, accelerators, minigunners, or something like that, you are most likely going to want to spam those guys. and the Gladiator's just sitting there with only around 2 or 3 of them, or probably even a few more, dealing very low damage to where they're just pretty much just a waste of space at that point. The Gladiator is only very useful at the early waves, and then as soon as it gets to the midpoint of the game, probably around wave 20-ish, weaker and is just downright useless in the rest points of the game. These are my points that I see from the Gladiator. The Gladiator, he went from a, pretty good and meh-ish tower to now just being just not that great, and obviously very, very overshadowed from the very more superior ones. For an example, the Brawler, the Sledger, but also the Warden. The Brawler, I just gotta have to admit it, is basically an upgraded Warden on steroids. Everyone just completely forgot about this guy, and I find that reasonable because, or understandable, because I mean, this guy just is not that great anymore, especially when game modes are becoming a lot more powerful enemies that are a lot more beefier, and the Gladiator that literally dealing like 2 hit points per slash is very pathetic and is very laughably bad compared to like the Warden or something. That's just my opinion. In my opinion, the Gladiator is just a lot less weaker than he used to be back in the days, and maybe they should give him some buffs, like for an example, well, obviously just increasing damage and probably range, and that's probably it. But I feel like they should actually give him some pretty big buffs, because man, comparing him to all the other melee towers, this guy is quite pathetic.